Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, June 24th, 2026, and today we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And as we do each week on the Roundup, we take our questions that we answer here on Wednesdays from the news stories that appear in our newsletter that comes out on Mondays. And that newsletter is called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And I'm happy to say that between our 2 versions of the newsletter, we now have well over 3,200 subscribers. So very humbled and honored that so many of my colleagues in the international education profession have made our newsletter a part of their regular international edification each week. And I'm very grateful that you're joining us here live on Facebook, but we also make this available on demand in an audio-only format through all your major podcast providers, as well as a video version on YouTube, as well as here on Facebook. So thank you very much for being a part of our international education news community. Grateful that you make this either the newsletter or the Roundup a regular part of your international edification each week. So thank you again for that. What we do with the newsletter is we look at the different news stories that were featured each week to see the different versions, different themes developing either through kind of the digital side of things with webinars, how social media is being used in international education, different blogs that we find particularly relevant to what we do in international ed, upcoming webinars that are being hosted, how AI is impacting what we do. So we take a look at a lot of those news stories in that section. We also have a section entitled Big Picture Issues that sum up some of the key topics we face in our industry, so whether it's a executive order or a new piece of legislation or funding related stories or impact studies that are released. We feature those in the newsletter. Then I have a Solutions Central section, which again, I like to focus on positives where I can and look at some of the bigger picture questions and how individual practitioners are using different takes on international ed to improve what they are what they are doing, how they improve their institutional approach to international ed. So we do cover all of that on the Roundup, on the newsletter that comes out Monday, either in email form or via LinkedIn subscription. So both forms are available on our website. You can see in the comments section of the pinned link at the top of the chat is to our website, smieconsulting.org/subscribe, and you can subscribe either via direct email or via LinkedIn notifications. So thank you again for checking out that newsletter. I've dumped the links to the 2 most recent editions, email and LinkedIn version from this week in the chat, so you can follow along as we go through some of the questions that we cover today. So, as I mentioned, the questions that we ask are based on some of the themes we see developing in the newsletter stories that we see each week. And I focus on 1 or 2 of those here as we go through on Wednesdays. So the first question of the day is, how should we communicate with students, international students in particular? And this seems like a very basic one, but it's really at the heart of what we do in international ed. So I do want to spend some time on this one because we do take for granted that, yes, we've been emailing students for as long as we can remember, as long as most of us have been in the profession. Email has been the tool that we regularly communicate with future students on using. So we do potentially meet them when we're abroad. We maybe call them if they're domestic, sometimes internationally as well. Involve our international alums to reach out in some cases. There's many different ways to do that, but how are we communicating with students, and are we missing the mark? And I think the easy question is, we should be communicating with students everywhere, every time, in every way imaginable. Because one thing that we shouldn't be doing, and unfortunately most of our institutions still rely exclusively on this as a one-to-one kind of method of communication, it's email only. And that's that was fine 20 years ago when it was the primary tool that students would be using to communicate with with universities that they may have interest in. But long gone are the days where it's the only tool that they're using. And a good colleague of mine, Greg Hulse of University of Central Missouri, is finishing up his time there and is a free agent looking for his next gig. And he's been putting out a lot of great content through his blogs on Substack and LinkedIn. And really encourage you all to check his out if you haven't already. But one of his most recent ones is called "The Future of Yield Isn't in the Inbox." And he talks about, he's a millennial. He's had an email since probably the late 90s, he says, and picked one that when he was 13 years old, what that looked like. Greg Zilla was the email address that he at Gmail, I think it was. So what obviously those emails are tools that many students have had. I know when my son was born in 2010. I set up an email for him. I got a Gmail account for his name, and that's something that he still has, and he's starting to use it more as he's entered high school, as he's needing emails to get on lists for certain things, certainly for outside of school, college and university kind of stuff. He's starting to use that for this, but it's one tool that he's using. He's not on any of the messaging apps right now, so he is basically using that and his phone number. But internationally, that's not always a realistic option to call. So for us in international education, I know many of us would hope that we could have a wider range of opportunities to connect with students. We'd love to be able to do it all in person, but we know that's cost prohibitive for almost all of us. But what Greg makes the point in his latest blog in terms of the future of yield isn't in the inbox. He talks about email has become part of the infrastructure that students have in Gen Z and now Gen Alpha, that they're using email obviously for applications, financial aid, institutional communication, and processes related to higher ed. But students are spending much less time in their inboxes. And that's going back not just in the last few years, but I certainly noticed that in the mid-noughties when social media was becoming a thing. When I was at Ball State University in Indiana, we were dealing specifically with our current students at the time, international students, and sending emails, inviting them to all these relevant workshops that they needed to be attending to keep themselves in status, or to learn about OPT or CPT opportunities that they would have. I noticed then that they weren't really responding to those emails. So I said, well, what's going on? So I pulled a couple of them aside, and after a few weeks of sending these emails out, it's like, what's going on? This is 2005. And Facebook had just become a thing, and was starting to grow all over like wildfire on college campuses. And a student came into who was one of our student workers. I said, hey, we're really having an issue here. A lot of our workshops are having for current students on the different benefits they have available, how to keep in status, all of that. They're not showing up. We're sending out all these emails, reminders to come, and putting up posters and everything. She said, well, we don't really look at our email that much. We're looking at social media. I go, what are you using? And Facebook. And so they said, okay. So we told all our international students, hey, sign up. We started our own page for our office. We started for current and future international students at Ball State. And we sent messages out, and we started getting responses. So that was the light bulb moment for me back in the noughties working with current students. And then shortly after that, as social media kind of kicked off around the world, it became much more of a common thing for students outside the U.S. to be on these kind of social platforms, particularly Facebook and other various local versions of those. So how we should communicate with students is by living on the platforms that they're living on, spending their time on. We know they live on their phones. We know today that messaging apps are a number one source of information in terms of how they're communicating with each other, with other service providers that they might be working with, and with institutions. Ideally, they'd love to hear from you there. And in terms of open rates, this is one of the things that has always kind of stuck in my mind recently, is when you are communicating with through email only, if you get a 10-15% open rate for students who are already engaged with you, that's probably high. That's probably really high. I know when I send out my email newsletter, I get about 50% of subscribers will actually open it each week. I can know the open rates, and then I know that's email is a smaller percentage of our overall subscribers, but I know on that I'm able to track who's opening the emails and or what percentage are opening emails. So for people who are really engaged with my content, and professionals, it's about 50% on email. It's probably 60-70% through LinkedIn in terms of the eyes each week of those that are subscribed. We'll see it. So I look at that, and I look at students who are looking at a number of different institutions. And if we're only emailing them, are we really maximizing the ways we can get our same message across to them? So in addition to email, what else? What are other ways you can communicate? You have your own institutional website. You have the chat bots potentially on there. You have your own social media channels that are one-to-many. That's you communicating to everybody who's subscribed or even follows your page or just gets connected with you randomly through different social media channels. And then you have messaging apps. You might have AI chatbots that are maybe contributing information that they're getting for you. But do you have a presence and have active means and ways that you can communicate with students on messaging apps? And most of recruiters I know, they have WhatsApp accounts in there, or if they're in recruiting in China, WeChat accounts. That's what they're using for students that they meet out in the field and they become applicants, hopefully, and they nurture them through the process. That usually tends to be a way that they're communicating with them, maybe through maybe not a personal account if you can avoid it, but another office-wide international account that you can use. Should you be using that? Absolutely, you should. I know we started working with a particular vendor, Platy, a couple of years ago, and this past year we launched WeChat for international recruitment, and we started trying to set up appointments with prospects in given campaigns that we're working. We're using WhatsApp to communicate with students. That got a lot more traction. We certainly noticed open rates skyrocketing through these messaging apps. When colleagues who are in the profession know this a whole lot better than I do, they would say that WhatsApp messages, typically you see open rates on WhatsApp messages 90% or higher. And that's pretty freaking amazing if you think about it. To have a messaging app where it's obviously one-to-one typically, you might have some ability to do one-to-many if you're using WhatsApp for business, and you should use that if you're using WhatsApp at all for an institutional account. You certainly want to look at that because, frankly, you don't want your own personal WhatsApp bogged down with a lot of student inquiries. But having that ability to do messaging, answering student-specific messages, getting them to respond to your invites, and being able to send that to multiple students at once, setting up groups within that, that's all relevant stuff that, hey, admitted students in Jordan, we can set up a WhatsApp group for all of them, invite them to participate and buy into that. So as a way to keep in touch. It is personal now. All recruitment is personal, or should be personal, to be most effective. And when you have the opportunity to do those messages through messaging apps, you're going to get much better responses. You'll get better open rates and hopefully better conversion down the line. So all of these things matter. I know we held an event in Saudi Arabia last November. We're trying to reach out to alumni who are back home in country, in the kingdom, and we had email addresses. They weren't responding to email addresses. I looked and said, okay, there's some phone numbers here. These are local Saudi Arabia numbers, and these people live in Riyadh. So let's focus on these 6, for example, that lived in the city. Looked at their phone numbers. I said, they're probably going to be using WhatsApp, and this number is probably tied to that. They all were on WhatsApp with that given number that we did have on file. And we were able to, I did a test with 6 alumni back in Riyadh, messaged them, hey, we're looking to do a reception in Riyadh on these dates. Are you available? Would you like to participate? Maybe speak on a panel? I gave them that opportunity. All 6 responded within a half an hour. So I know personal experience. This way, when you do one-on-one or one-to-many using messaging apps, you're really going to elevate your conversion rate dramatically. So communicating with students using multiple means, yes, on your global social media channels, on your through your website, through your email, through making sure AI search bots have your updated content. All of that matters. But when it really comes down to it, if you have the ability to message through messaging apps, you're going to increase your conversion significantly. Greg certainly talks about that in his article, and certainly my personal experience is it makes a hell of a difference. The problem is, do our CRMs allow us to do that? Most don't. I know we work in Slate, and Slate, as you know, is highly customizable. And I've worked on in both Salesforce and Slate institutions. Previous institutions, Salesforce was customized as on the domestic side incredibly significantly but internationally didn't really have bandwidth to really take care of our needs. But where I am now, we're a Slate school, been here about a year and a half now, and we're at the University of Akron, and we've now are adding into Slate because of one of the relationships with our service providers, ability to capture messaging apps like WhatsApp or WeChat. We're doing it sort of as a temporary trial, our initial trial, with those two platforms to capture that information and the phone numbers attached to them, and getting a permission, a GDPR kind of sign-off permission to message them that way. And then we'll be able to hopefully do that. The functionality of making that all happen within Slate, that's yet to be determined. That's the next step that we're going to look at. Hopefully that can be rolled out in the next year. But at least capturing the information and then having a file dump where we can take those numbers out and then message them through our WhatsApp and WeChat accounts. So that's something we're going to be doing a lot more of in the next year. We're not an expert on how to do that yet, but we know we need to be doing that, and we're moving in that general direction. So that's it for on the first one. Well, let's move on to our second question, which is, when others zag, should you zip? And yes, it's a play on words. Zig and zag is the normal opposition there, but we're going to zip since I work at the University of Akron. We are the Zips, and there's a long story behind our nickname, but we won't go into that today. But we are an institution that has had, over the past decade, a significant change in our enrollment. We have had basically a reduction by 50% of our overall enrollment, from about 30,000 10 years ago to about 15,000 now. And over the last couple of years, we've kind of bottomed out and are on the way back up, particularly with our domestic recruitment. We're starting to see some growth on the international side, despite all the domestic challenges we're having with our current policy environment. But we're seeing our institution kind of has reconfigured. We've become much leaner. We've had faculty layoffs in a few years ago. We avoided a second round of retrenchment this past year. We avoided that, so now we're kind of on our way back up. We've kind of survived the first wave of the enrollment cliff last fall well, and are looking good for this fall to be at or near those numbers again, if not above. So we are, I think, fighting fit now, and we're now putting together pieces that align us with growth areas that really make sense. And we've talked about this before in terms of direction for institutions when it comes to international. And I know it's always one, if not one, the first thing you think about is 1A, and that is diversifying where your students are coming from. And that's because you can't become overly dependent on one or two countries. Most of us are, in one way or another. China and India have become the two biggest sources of students on our campuses. China had been the number one for undergraduates and probably still is for a lot of countries internationally. In the United States is the number one source. But since the pandemic, those numbers have been declining. We've probably seen some growth in graduate Chinese, which is offsetting the undergrad drop-offs, but undergrads are here longer, so there's revenue implications when those numbers decline. So where the new undergraduate internationals coming from, we're starting to see growth in India. We're starting to see growth in Latin America. We're starting to see growth in the Middle East. So they're compensating, but we're making, particularly with our new partner in uni, we have a particular presence now that we've never had before, which is great. We're zipping when others are zagging, or we're zigging when others are zagging. So, not Gonzaga, but in terms of what we're doing differently is you see a lot of schools, yes, they're still focusing on diversifying where their students are coming from. We're certainly doing that too. but we're also looking at diversifying how we're teaching and where we're teaching our programs. And that's obviously talks about different modes of education. Obviously, distance education, online education is a piece of that. Hybrid versions where you might be delivering some of your courses online, some in person. And that can be done in a variety of different formats, domestically and internationally. We are looking at T&E partnerships overseas where we work with new or current institutional partners with universities overseas that we can offer our programs that complement what they offer, not a direct competition, complement what they offer in some of our better ranked programs, like our polymer science program. We're exploring options to deliver that abroad. We're looking at besides institutional partnerships for T&E, we're looking at some exclusive partnerships to deliver maybe our online MBA program through a company or a third party in one of the major markets that's exclusive to employees of that company. So looking at a lot of different opportunities in terms of how we deliver our programs and where we're delivering them. And those formats are a lot more complicated, and it's a good challenge, at least for me at this point in my career, to be moving into that T&E space, and having conversations with senior leadership that understand the political landscape we're involved in now, that it is going to be harder to get the direct students to come the same way they used to, given the political challenges that they face for getting visas and appointments and all of that. And just the bad PR job the country has had done in the last year and a half in terms of having policies that make international students feel welcome, and international and visitors in general from abroad feel welcome. Thankfully, I think we'll talk next week about the World Cup effect on what's the positives of coming out of the World Cup in terms of all of these international visitors from around the world coming to see their country's teams in the World Cup. The positive things are coming out of that and the experiences that they're having, as good PR to counter the negative political things they hear from their home country, from the news media about the United States. So really encouraged to start seeing some of that. We'll talk more about that, what that looks like, and how maybe you can capitalize on that for your own institution. When all the world says the U.S. sucks, how do you talk about us in a more positive light? You talk about your own successes on your own campus. Your current students who are living the daily experiences on your campus, recent graduates who are benefiting from your education. So that's a lot of what going the opposite of what the culture is and the current climate suggests you probably should go. My colleague Blorina Polovina in uni, she has also a regular series that she puts out on her LinkedIn, and now I think she's moving to Substack as well, maybe not. But her most recent edition is "When Volume Drops, the Machine Gets Exposed," and she's talking here in her piece really about the challenges institutions have that have become overly dependent on students from one country or one area, and when those numbers tank, what does that look like for the rest of your institution? She really talks about obviously the challenging times we're in international student recruitment wise, the policy and geopolitical dynamics, visa environments, and softness suddenly in traditionally strong markets like China and India. So, and the competitiveness, frankly, in the market. So these periods do give an opportunity to rethink how you do what you do. And the institutions that do have the vision and the foresight to really think about that what it is, and she puts it clearly as an enrollment journey, that it's not just one office's responsibility or not handing off from one office to the next. It needs to be a full life cycle approach to enrollment management. And I've certainly contributed to a book chapter on this very subject, that from initial prospect to successful alumni, there's multiple offices will have roles in that process, but it's not often the case that all those offices are on the same page in terms of what the expectations are, what the services we need to be delivering are for our international students, and full awareness and approach to handling international student needs throughout their journey, and how domestically how domestically the student needs are very different, how we have to recognize that and have policies in place and supportive programming and guidance for them along the way. So a great article from Lorena on that particular topic, talking about the operational infrastructure, again, how the different pieces need to fit together, and the staff capabilities, and really focusing on that human side of recruitment. So thanks again to Lorena for that outstanding article. And let's get to our last question of the day, and that is, what is the state of China's higher ed and job market? Two obviously very different ends of the spectrum, talking about life cycles. We are seeing in higher ed in China, over the last couple of weeks, we've seen a couple different stories. We saw a couple of weeks ago article about how Gaokao numbers took a dip this year, 2026, as students are pursuing alternatives to university study. Some are looking abroad. Some are looking to go into more vocational programs because they see the outcome in the job market not that great. You also had this past week an article, China's universities cut 12,000 obsolete degrees amid their race to embrace AI. And that's impacting, obviously, 12,000 degree programs across the country. A lot of humanities that are getting axed. You're seeing significant challenges to what's considered the norms, or what's considered job fields that make sense for students. So we're seeing in China a significant earth-shaking realignment. Kind of already knew they were moving towards the AI and investing in that heavily, but seems like they're all in, and perhaps at the expense of what we are grappling with too in the United States now, and that's kind of the critical thinking piece. Are we losing that? Or how do we maintain that as we ramp up our use of AI? So a lot of interesting dynamics going on. China going all in on the AI side. We're, as universities, probably a lot of us have cut back a lot of the liberal arts and useless degrees. Certainly, the current administration would like us to do a similar purge of jobs or degree programs that don't lead to good jobs after graduation, or whatever good means. But certainly, those things are on the radar of this administration, and I think many institutions certainly see the kinds of programs that they can offer. The balance that needs to be struck between those that are needed for the core curriculum, the general education requirements that everybody has to take, and those that are actually leading to jobs and graduating students who are gaining employment right away. So a couple articles, one that focuses from South China Morning Post that talks about those 12,000 degrees that are being eliminated. And the other side of the coin is an article that focuses on China's job crunch, that graduates that are coming back are particularly those coming from the UK who've gone there for the one-year master's degrees. They've seen that. There's been huge volume going to those one-year master's degree programs in the UK over the last decade or so. Those numbers are starting to shrink a bit because there's the folks that are coming back with those master's degrees are not getting as high level paying jobs as they might have in the past. That there's perhaps less value associated with these one-year programs, in terms of what that experience brings to them. So we know the Chinese students typically, even in the U.S., the lion's share will go back home or to third countries after they're finished with their degree studies, even though they're the number 2 group in terms of OPT. That's only because of the volume, I think, that of total numbers in the United States. But you are seeing, from the UK's perspective, a decrease in the Chinese students going for master's degrees because they're not seen as valuable for those returning into the market. So a lot of different moving pieces here with the Chinese market. With fewer students taking a Gaokao to go directly onto Chinese universities, also potentially looking abroad, going to vocational programs. Those that are coming back from master's degree programs in the UK, probably not getting as good a jobs as they might have hoped. So there's some dissatisfaction there. So and then having just a limited, if they do stay, they have a very limited range, or an increasingly limited and tech-focused, STEM-focused range of academic programs that they can choose from. So certainly a very volatile market in China in terms of where the push and pull factors are moving. And I certainly think you're going to see some movement there in the coming months about what our preferred destinations might be. I know I'm going back there for the first time for Akron in the next 6 months or so. So looking forward to seeing how things are changing. Obviously, we all know that the tech environment has only increased, and the cashless society in China and all of those fun things, the transportation system and trains. It was 3 years ago I was there last, and major changes underway still today. But I think the openness there is perhaps, shifting a little bit. We know the students are looking at a wider range of destinations, and they're really valuing cost, and they're more price sensitive, and outcomes become even clearer for them that as a priority. So we'll see where that takes us in terms of China. But thank you again for joining us this week on the Roundup. Looking forward to chatting with you again as we enter the second half of 2026. Next Wednesday, July 1st, we'll have our next Roundup. So until then, look forward to chatting with you. Cheers.